Welcome to the DeepMed Seminar, a history forum for ocean science, strategy and environment, brought to you by the DeepMed project, funded by the ERC Consolidator Grant Scheme. The DeepMed project is about discovering the deep Mediterranean environment, a history of science and strategy from 1860 to the present. Today we have with us Irmak Ertör, to discuss issues related to blue environmental justice. She's an assistant professor at Ataturk Institute for Modern Turkish History in Bogazici University in Istanbul, and she has done her PhD at the University of Barcelona on political ecology of marine finfish aquaculture in Europe. And then she was a postdoc also at the University of Barcelona at the Institute for Environmental Science and Technology within the Environmental Justice ERC-funded project. So yeah, Irmak, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the introduction and for invitation, of course. It's a pleasure to meet you and to know better the research that you conduct in the DeepMed project. I will just share my presentation in a second. Let me see. And now I'm not going to see you, unfortunately, but please feel free to interrupt me at any time if something works bad or if you have any questions. So, well, Lina already introduced me and introduced my path, academic path in a way. And at the same time, I have to say that I have to tell you that I'm at the same time a scuba instructor who is really passionate about Mediterranean depths. So that also brings me to that kind of research. And today I will present you one of the diverse social actors of the Mediterranean. And this is rather a neglected social actor, I might say. And well, linking the topic of the environmental part of these seminars, DeepMed seminars, the environmental part, I will mostly focus on the environmental dimension, but I will try to historicize it and politicize it, linking it to the blue justice and environmental justice debates. Here we have these coastal communities and fisher people. In fact, they have been like an important social actor of the Mediterranean for longer generations. But they have been recently neglected, and I will try to discuss with you their struggles. Okay, so this presentation, part of this presentation and the blue justice theoretical framework that I want to explain is mainly based on an article that I published in the Journal of Peasant Studies entitled as "We Are the Oceans, We Are the People, Fisher People Struggles for Blue Justice." The theoretical framework comes from there, but in fact, in this presentation, I tried to shift the focus on Mediterranean so that it can become more, sorry, I am seeing something strange in my screen, but I guess it is okay for you. So in this presentation, I try to shift the focus on Mediterranean so that it becomes more relevant for DeepMed's project and for your research. So we will have some part of the blue justice theoretical framework, which I already worked on, and then other cases, again with the same methodology, other cases that would be perhaps more interesting for you. So the blue justice framework and the analysis that I made and the blue justice theoretical framework that I tried to establish focuses on the analysis of 120 socio-environmental conflicts in which small-scale fisher communities or fisher organizations were the main social actors, resisting some industrial projects. So here I will present you a little bit environmental justice and blue justice perspectives. As Lino said before, this was also a part of the ERC project, M-Justice project. I will present the methodology of it and, well, an outcome of this project, of course, but the remaining part is an ongoing research. I just heard that one of you is already specialized in environmental justice. I would like to discuss with him as well a bit further, but maybe for some of you, environmental justice is not that kind of a common concept, or maybe you don't know where it comes from. So recently, I'm sure you heard about different intersections of these debates, right? Like environmental justice, climate justice, then we have food justice. All of them lead to different alliances and convergences, political convergences, of course. But at the same time, blue justice, fits also to these debates and tries to show and tries to a bit mobilize in a way another aspect which was more neglected. That's linked to the fisher communities, to the coastal communities, and different diverse actors of it. Recently, well, I might say in the last 5-10 years, perhaps, it has been more kind of a recent debate, especially for the circles who are working on marine fisheries, marine ecosystems, or fisheries economics, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me give you just a very brief introduction of where environmental justice concept comes from and how it is linked to different debates, different struggles. Environmental justice concepts comes from social movements. That's an important part of the study, I think, and current important part of the current debates as well. It emerged in the 1980s in the United States, more specifically in Warren County in North Carolina in 1982. There were protests against toxic landfills, and after one of these protests, there were 414 arrests of the protesters. And here we had mainly, as a social actor, mobilized social actor, mainly Black people, Black communities. And what they were saying was basically showing, also through some statistics, showing that these toxic landfills were placed where the Black communities were living. And in fact, not only they were like kind of low class communities, whenever it was compared where these toxic landfills were placed compared to white people and Black people or Hispanic people, people of color, if I may say so, it was obvious that not only social place but also race was mattering, and therefore this led to the discussions of environmental racism as well. Okay, so as I said, it's a concept introduced by social movements, and it mainly refers to first access, so equal access to and or control over natural resources and commons, but then not only access, but also the distribution of environmental costs and risks is important, the just distribution of it. Then we have participation aspect. Here it is important to ensure the equal participation in environmental decision making, like including both recognition and capabilities aspects are also important. But like in environmental decision making, every social actor has to have their own voice, and it tries to position the movements, groups of people, different class of people against structural discrimination, structural inequalities, and racism or environmental racism. So there was this, in the beginning of the concept, there was this debate of, okay, I'm going to put there a factory. Okay, it might have some toxic contamination or pollution, create some contamination. But of course, I will bring their jobs and employment, right? And this is still kind of a discourse which is sometimes considered as valid. But there, people began to position themselves against the duality of jobs or your health. So it was linked to occupational safety issues and like work and health issues. And at the same time, because of the green revolution at the period, there were also debates linked to exposure of farmers to chemicals and pesticides and what was happening in their bodies, right? So environment, with the environmental justice concept as well, environment began to obtain other definitions, not like as the ecology or environment over there, or like pristine environments and so on and so forth, isolated from society. But recently, it is mostly being defined as the environment is being defined as where we live, where we work, where we play and eat. There are also other definitions that are overlapping. This last part, for example, it's also linked to blue justice. This last part is where we eat, also links the debates to food justice and food sovereignty debates. Okay, here I wanted to show you, like with a visual image, the Environmental Justice Atlas. I'm sure some of you know it, and perhaps others do not. This is an online database, an open access database. As of today, there were 3,921 cases, conflict cases, also environmental conflict cases that were registered through the same methodology, through the same, using the same form and some in-depth analysis. Here you can see different dots from overall the world, and I will briefly present the methodology of it. So this is a tool for mapping, understanding, and analyzing socio-environmental conflicts throughout the world. And at the same time, it has a different methodology of collaborative research process. So that is not only based on the work and research of academics, but also on the research conducted by activists, social civil society members, environmental justice organizations that are reclaiming environmental justice. So it leads to the co-production of knowledge in a way. Here you can see the types of conflicts in order to understand better the methodology of the Environmental Justice Atlas. You would see different industrial projects, like the yellow ones are linked to nuclear power plants or nuclear projects. The orange one is linked to extraction of minerals or building materials. Then we have waste management, biomass and land conflicts, fossil fuels and climate justice or energy conflicts, water, infrastructure and built environment, tourism, biodiversity, and industrial and utilities conflicts. So all of these colored dots, they refer to one specific type of industrial project and the conflict it creates and the struggle it creates. Okay. As a method, firstly, I have to mention the statistical political ecology approach. So I said that right now there are 3,921 cases that are reported, that are being identified. Of course, it cannot have a total coverage, a total representation of all conflicts, all environmental conflicts that are existing in the world. But it aims to have a geographical coverage, like that was one of the aims and objectives in the last years, and thematical coverage as well, as far as we could, let's say, and it is still ongoing. And apart from the statistical political ecology approach, like with purposive sample, which helps to testing correlations between conflicts and material flows, or mobilization types, or strategies, and so on and so forth, there are also lots of colleagues, lots of researchers, sometimes also activist researchers, that are contributing through in-depth analysis. So I will also explain a bit better my methodology that I applied for this research, and which also included different methodologies. Its main objectives include mapping and analyzing socio-environmental conflicts, as I said before, but at the same time, studying and contributing to the environmental justice movement, so that there can be kind of bridges and networks among environmental justice organizations, because all of this information is available, is for free and available for sure. And people, different networks can check what kind of projects existed, again, also by using several filters, what kind of struggles existed, perhaps against the same company or mining company, or against the same structural changes, and so on and so forth. So it helps to visualize, reveal and analyze different global environmental injustices, and at the end also to discuss and create alternatives. Just to have a clearer picture in our minds, so you can see this form, this database form in the webpage www.ejatlas.org, and there you would both have access to information, or you could just register and get access to the form, and you can enter one conflict which you might be aware of. And the form asks several questions, the same questions for each conflict, regarding the type of conflict, its exact location, which ones are the social actors who are mobilized, environmental justice organizations who participated in the struggle, the relevant commodities at stake, which creates a conflict, or the details of the investment project, including its financialization, and impacts, including health impacts, socioeconomic impacts, ecological impacts. And it asks the questions of whether this struggle, whether this conflict was contributed to environmental justice, to achieve environmental justice. So this is the main methodology that I used, and I continue to use in some small projects. But well, in this article that I mentioned in the beginning, and in that research, I tried to show the invisible, or let's say neglected, social actors of the Environmental Justice Atlas, which are fisher communities, fisher organizations, and fisher people. So they were, in fact, like sometimes mentioned in some of these conflicts, because you can see all of the mobilized actors and researchers who were entering data to the platform, they were also mentioning fisher people sometimes. But like there were, when you check the EJ Atlas, the sensation, the feeling was like, okay, they exist, but to some extent, and so on. So most people, in fact, currently, I mean, academics or civil society, they do not know that there are also fisher social movements, for example. Here I will mention two main global social movements of fisher people. The first one is the World Forum of Fisher Peoples, which was founded in 2001. And they had their 7th General Assembly in 2017 in New Delhi, India, where I also participated. And they are an organization representing 75 fisher organizations from 50 countries. Then we have the WFF, World Forum of Fish Harvesters and Fish Workers. They were founded in 1997, and in fact, separation is a little bit geographical. There were also some political debates, but like they still collaborate a lot. And in WFF, we might see more Latin American and Canadian organizations, for example, while WFFB, we can see more Indian and Asian members. WFF has 44 fisher organizations as its members, and they are from 42 countries. And I'm sure most of you have heard about La Via Campesina, and La Via Campesina is well known. It's in the English translation is the peasant way. And well, they also, in fact, have fishers as their members. But in 1997, fishers also felt the necessity of, okay, focusing on their own problems, their own struggles, and trying to collaborate in more close circles, and at the same time they mutually, of course, contribute to La Via Campesina or to the fisher organizations. And there are some members, for example, Brazil, who is both member of WFFP and at the same time La Via Campesina, and they learn from each other, they build alliances, and that's why politically it's important. Then we have some others where these struggles also meet, like ICSF, International Collective in Support of Fish Workers, and IPC Rome, where these social actors, again, together with peasants, with beekeepers, with pastoralists, they can come together for food justice or food sovereignty. Okay, the global research that I conducted focused on these 120 fisheries and aquaculture conflicts. And here you have, again, the colored dots. Some of them are more extraction conflicts. There are some that are water management conflicts, others that are more like biomass, under the category of biomass and land conflicts or energy conflicts. But as a second type category, they all fit to the fisheries and aquaculture conflicts, where fisher people are one of either the main social actor or mostly, or one of the main social actors that are being mobilized. So in terms of methodology, I said that it includes both this statistical political ecology approach so that we can look at several conflicts at the same time and see some correlations, but it also includes in-depth analysis. And here I also used like participatory action and participant action and participant observation and participatory action methods, where I participated in the 7th General Assembly of WFFP. They, in fact, do not allow like NGOs or civil society members to come and join and so on, because it's their General Assembly where they make decisions, right? But I was the interpreter of the Turkish fisherman. You can see it at the left-hand side, Erdoğan Kartal, who is the president of an umbrella association in Istanbul region, which represents 34 fishing, mostly small-scale fishing cooperatives. And under these 34 fishing cooperatives, there are 2,500 fisher members. So that was the first time that this Istanbul Birlik, this umbrella association, became part of the WFFP. And next to him, you can see Nasik, who was at that time the main coordinator, the general secretary from South Africa. And you can see other fisher women. Usually you hear about the term like fisherman, right? Which ignores, in fact, the work and the care work and the recognition of identity of fisher women. So they are others. They are from Kiara. They were also participating as well. And there, as an interpreter and participant, I could gain much more insights, deeper insights, and could make a more in-depth analysis. Here you can see 120 conflicts, which I'm not going to talk about, but you can see varying conflicts from Ecuador, Canada, Mauritania, or Greece, Nicaragua, Lebanon, and so on and so forth. I will skip those. That's available in the article. Okay, let me then briefly explain the Blue Justice theoretical framework that I, especially in this article, try to propose to understand these conflicts and struggles. And I defined it under 3 dimensions. The first one is the material and biophysical dimension. The second one is linked to spatial justice and spatial conflicts. And the third one is linked to autonomy and sovereignty. Let's first try to understand the first one, material and biophysical dimension. Here I try to show the increasing marine social metabolism, which is linked to political ecology studies, ecological economic studies, and well, in fact, I'm sure you have heard about the peak oil, for example, as a term, right? About non-renewables and about fossil fuels, with the increasing social metabolism and with the intense use of the society of these fossil fuels or non-renewable resources. But the society came to a point where we have to speak, where we can speak and have to speak about pig fish as well, which is a term proposed also by Daniel Pauli, a very well-known fisheries economist, let's say. And he was arguing that more or less at the end of 1980s, we came to a point, after the industrialization of fisheries in the 1950s, we came to a point where the yields were going down and down each year. And which is not only related to the yields, of course, but it is also linked to the devastation of marine ecosystems, extinction of several species, especially bigger ones, especially like the carnivores and so on. And well, after that, the society and the overfishing and over-harvesting became a more well-known issue. But still in the society, most of the people don't know where the fish they eat comes from, how it was being either caught by capture fisheries or comes from aquaculture, and so on and so forth. And this pig fish is also linked to aquaculture and fish farms. In fact, we will discuss in one specific case. But well, that's the part related to harvesting, capturing of the fish or aquaculture production, mainly related to food aspect. The second part is again linked to social metabolism, marine social metabolism. But here we have the increasing use of energy and materials, global use of energy and materials. And each time we see more and more thermal power plants, nuclear power plants, and most of these industrial projects that are placed on the coastline, right? And they are, of course, accompanied by waste. They generate waste and contamination and pollution on coasts. So that's the first main dimension, material and biophysical dimension. Then we have the spatial justice as a second dimension, as I said before. And here we have spatial struggles, mostly related to the allocation of the space. I was mentioning in the beginning, the fisher people who were traditionally using the marine space as their home sometimes, but as an important part of their livelihood. But this gets each time more restricted, or they are being displaced, they are being dispossessed, and it forms also part of the deruralization or depeasantization in a way, that processes of agrarian change. But well, here we link these issues of spatial justice to struggles. We try to understand the struggles against ocean grabbing, displacement, and dispossession in some. And the third point is regarding the autonomy and sovereignty. Here we have to try to understand the organizations of these people, fisher people, coastal communities, and their organizations. And we will look at their political agency and collaboration and alliances with other social movements. Okay, let's have some cases right now. I will try to show you some cases from the Mediterranean. And mostly we will see cases where fisher people are involved. Either they are the main social actors who are mobilized, or they are also involved, because in the conflicts that are represented in the Mediterranean, that are registered in the Mediterranean, they were more limited regarding the participation of fisher people. But I will try to show you the main ones so that we can have a broader understanding following the same structure of the dimensions, material and biophysical dimension, spatial justice and autonomy of fisher people. And we will try to have a coverage, geographical coverage from the Mediterranean again. Okay, the first example comes from Greece. Here we have coastal fisher people who were protesting the government policies that were favoring troll fishing and industrial, which means industrial fisheries. And they were even engaging in repeated hunger strikes and demonstrations against trawlers. And they tried to collaborate. Well, first 19 fishermen started a hunger strike outside the ministry building, and they tried to also include the civil society to their struggles. That was the first part related to the, as I said, like the peak fish, right? Industrial fisheries and aquaculture, let's say. Now we come to the industrial pollution part, which is also under the first category, under the first dimension, material and biophysical dimension. Here we have a more historical case, let's say, from 1980, which is considered among the world's largest oil spills. And there are two from the Mediterranean. One is this oil tanker, Iran Serenade oil tanker, and then there is another one called Haven in 1991. So we see the explosion of this oil tanker in Navarino Bay in Greece, and here we have a fisherman like saving the crew, 29 people from the crew, and well, then the fisher people were again very much engaged with the recovery of the marine ecosystem. But at the same time, but of course, as a result, and this is the result of the global capitalist economy and its increasing social metabolism and marine social metabolism, it affects, of course, both the surface and the depths of the Mediterranean, both ecologically, affecting marine ecosystems, and of course, socially, economically, and politically. Now we have another oil spill from Lebanon. This is from 2006 as a result of the Israeli war on Lebanon, which resulted in environmental damages and at the same time human death, of course. So right now it is a quite important topic as well, with the Israeli war going on. So in this case, there were also fishers trying to help for the recovery of the marine ecosystems. But in fact, they were the ones, even though several NGOs were trying to make some campaigns for the recovery of the marine ecosystems, for trying to initiate cleanup campaigns and so on. There were these debates of whether, to what extent there should be some compensation payments following the polluter pays principle, but it was like by UN, European Commission, there were like ongoing discussions, but it was, at the end, it was still a catastrophe on an environmental, social, and economic level. After these oil spills, again, in the mining and energy dimension, we have some nuclear power plants. So one of them comes from Turkey. Again, we are on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And there is this anti-nuclear platform, which was going on since 1976. The movement was started in 1976. And unfortunately, this was the first nuclear power plant project in Turkey. And even though there were lots of protests and there were big campaigns, this was approved, and the project was commissioned to a Russian state-owned company. And even though there were the questionings of earthquakes and what has happened in Japan, it still continued, and it is unfortunately going on. Here, fisher people were not at the forefront of the mobilizations, but they were active protesters as well. And in fact, like the surveys made nationally with the participation of all of the citizens in Turkey, like 2/3 of the population is against nuclear power plants in Turkey, and we 80% of Mersin, of the city covering Akkuyu, is against it, but it still continues. Okay. Focusing on mining energy, let's go to Italy, to a little bit more to the west. And here we have Trans-Adriatic Pipeline in Puglia, Italy, which aimed to transport natural gas. It is a part of a greater project called the Southern Gas Corridor, including Trans-Anatolian Pipeline and the Trans-Caspian Gas Pipeline. This also, between Azerbaijan and Italy, this also led to lots of protests and a big campaign, which was in a big collaboration and alliance called No Tap Committee, and where the project was wanted to be placed was Sanfoca. This is like on the Italian coast, and of course, like you can imagine that it was important for its tourism and fishing. So many local people, many NGOs, many local, regional, and international NGOs formed part of the movement. In fact, the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission in Puglia region rejects the project for a while in 2014, but there were still the initiatives going on. Now we will come to the western part of the Mediterranean, to Spain and to the Balearic Sea. You might be more knowledgeable about this project and the debate and the struggle impact. Here there were these oil and gas prospections, and it was documented that it would be a threat to marine life and it would negatively impact fisheries and tourism at the same time. There were the oppositions claiming that the seismic test would reduce fishing holes by up to 70% and so on and so forth. And the Alliance Mar Brava, which united 50 organizations, we can name them environmental justice organizations. They were including like business group, environmentalist groups, unions, and fisher people. They were opposing this industrial project as well. Here another example, briefly, that's also black dots, which means like energy, fossil fuels and energy conflicts. So in Egypt, in Itku, local residents were against to BP project of natural gas offshore concession in 2011. So the local residents already experienced some illegal dumping activities before in around 2006 in the Mediterranean, again by two different companies. So they were against this project, and they were collaborating with different social actors as well. But still, it was like going back and forth, and BP was awaiting an approval by public consultation, and this was an ongoing struggle as well. Here we have, again, the second dimension, spatial justice dimension. And here I'm going to give the examples of some infrastructure projects, some mega projects. Coastal tourism, of course, it depends whether it is kind of a more just and sustainable local-based tourism or ecotourism examples, or whether it's more mega projects, mega tourism projects. And finally, since it's also a spatial issue, I will give an example of industrial intensive fish farms. This one is just an example to have a geographical coverage. Here we don't have fisher people, but most of you might better know this case as well from Almeria, the construction of Hotel Algarrobico. This was one of the Spain's few remaining unspoiled Mediterranean spots, in fact, within the Cabo de Gata Nature Reserve, and there was a construction of a huge hotel. And there were different groups collaborating in an alliance, and in fact there were lots of court cases as well. And it was stopped at some point, but then it was continued as well. So it was an open case as well for a long while. Greenpeace was also, you can see here the boat of the Greenpeace. Greenpeace was also active in that case. Another tourism project which is rejected, which is contested, comes from the island of Crete. The island of Crete is very important for tourism purposes, in fact, and the local residents are not against tourism per se, but this was a complex tourism investment, like a mega project. And this was in an area which was declared between 1991 and 2007. It was declared as a Natura 2000 network. So many environmental organizations in the island of Crete and social groups, they were mobilizing. Among them, there were also local fisher people. In 2010, there was the rejection of environmental impact assessment. Then in 2012, there's a new investment project with another name and with some different financial members, and that was that was going on in that way as well. Finally, I will give the example of a fish farm. We will come back to Turkey, and under biomass and land conflicts, where the aquaculture and fisheries conflicts also stay as a category. We had this fish farm project in Suacık Bay, which was also declared as a slow city, by the way. Here we will see the alliances of local people, small-scale fisher people, again at the forefront of this conflict. The mayor of Seferihisar, who then became the mayor of Izmir, the bigger metropolitan city, but like he had this vision of slow city as well, and he was also collaborating with lots of social actors. So this area was under one of the general allocation plans. This area was declared as a site for fish farms, industrial fish farms. And when we talk about tuna farms, tuna fattening farms, in fact, those are like big spaces where the tuna that have been caught is brought, and then there they need to get bigger and bigger, fatter, and then they are exported to countries, mostly to the Asia, mostly to Japan, and so on and so forth. And well, this struggle was successful in stopping the project, and the area didn't receive any fish farms in that period. Okay, finally, I will try to keep it also short as far as possible so that we can have time for the questions. Finally, the last dimension that I talked about in the article and in this Blue Justice framework is autonomy and sovereignty. So this is related to the construction of autonomy and self-determination of different groups within fisher movements and fisher organizations per se as well. But if we look at the organization of fisher movements within fisher, the political dynamics within fisher movements, it's important to have. They find it important to have horizontal organizational structures that would minimize internal power asymmetries. That's also done in La Via Campesina, and they have parallel structures in that sense. That's why they have, for example, sub-assemblies in fisher social movements, like they have fisher women's assemblies, so that they can talk their problems among themselves and bring it to the General Assembly as a decision taken in the sub-assembly, and so that it can be also discussed and approved in the General Assembly. If we talk about fisher women, usually we do not, we don't have any main collective or group in the Mediterranean working with fishermen or like any organization by fisher women. But there is, for example, in Gandia, a fishing cooperative led by fisher women. But in other parts of the world, there are other struggles for recognition of fisher women, and then we see further organizations. Then there are other sub-assemblies like indigenous fisher communities or the youth, because there is a huge intergenerational issue within peasant movements or fishers as well. And then we have the regional members of the coordination committee in WFFP. Here we will have also, with Erdoğan Kartal, for example, a representation of Mediterranean region. And all of them, together with their concerns, they contribute to food sovereignty and intersectional justice demands. Here I wanted to mention another case, again from the EJ Atlas, Environmental Justice Atlas, but this is not from Mediterranean right now because I don't know any concrete case and group of fisher women being mobilized. This is, just to give you an example, this is from Indonesia. PPNI, Perempuan Nelayan, their struggle for their recognition and rights, because they are not considered even as fisher people. They don't have the license because they are not men, and they first have this recognition, this struggle for recognition, but at the same time for their social and economic rights. And here I have again another example for indigenous fisher communities mobilizations that comes from the Kamchatka region from Russian Federation. indigenous peoples are important in the fisheries struggles as well, because they have both indigenous and territorial rights, but they are being under threat as well by several industrial projects. So their self-organization is also important. And here I wanted to give you the example of the Mediterranean representation in the WFFP. I told in the beginning that in 2017, Istanbul Birlik from Istanbul region, this umbrella association, formed part of the WFFP, became a member of WFFP. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a coordination committee meeting in Istanbul because Erdoğan Kartal became the regional representative, one of the two regional representatives that are composed of one man and one woman always. This is like regionally, it is like representing Eastern Europe and Middle East, Central Asia. And right now, for 3 or 4 years, Erdoğan Kartal will be the regional representative. Okay, finally, just to explain the results and the discussion in the previous article regarding the Blue Justice. Here, another important part under autonomy and sovereignty is to focus on alliances and movement building, which is where, again, like in the La Via Campesina is very well known, but usually WFFP and WFF are not known. Either they don't receive support even from the civil society or other institutional actors. So Blue Justice framework in this way aimed to understand the reasons of such environmental conflicts and fisher folks' justice demands. There are also concepts like fisheries justice, for example, and to highlight the ways in which these inequalities or injustices or these conflicts are contested, where alliance building views strong links for empowering marginalized actors and for emancipatory politics. So it also aimed to show, I guess it was successful in showing that fisher folks' conflicts are not isolated cases. Some case there, which looks kind of a NIMBY, a couple of fisher people are against of something, and so on and so forth. But in fact, there are still lots of small-scale fisher people around the globe. And even though they are sometimes more connected, they are sometimes less connected to each other, their cases and their political cause, in fact, are very much linked to each other. And these problems that they face are results of increasing marine social metabolism and capitalist society, and ocean grabbing activities, either by private or by state actors that aim further capital accumulation. So finally, I should say, to understand environmental justice, how environmental justice evolved and how concepts like blue justice were added to the debate, is that they changed from reactive protests against environmental injustices to advocacy for sustainable and just alternatives. That's like kind of showing the alliances among different focus points. Here I want to finish the presentation with some of the pictures from the General Assembly, where their slogan was "We are the oceans, we are the people," which was also the part of the title of my article. And here you will see some other pictures from different movements and moments of protest, where fisher people also ask for stopping ocean crime, saying no to experimental seabed mining that comes from Pacific law, and other pictures, and a TNI report which we wrote with some colleagues situating small-scale fisheries in the global struggle for agroecology and food sovereignty. Okay, here I'm going to stop. Thank you for listening. And up.
Thanks a lot, Irmak. I trust that you can see us now.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, wonderful. So again, we were listening the entire time, I promise, and we enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much. It's really impressive to see what these geographical / almost big data tools can do for understanding processes that are very local, but at the same time very global. And if I am allowed to maybe start the Q&A by posing a question a little bit about that. The advantages are clear, but the methodology may have some inherent dangers, which, I mean, at the end, you were saying that all conflicts are connected and there is almost like a common enemy, right? The common enemy being processes aiming at further capital accumulation. The problem that I see with that is that because you have so many cases and you have a statistical analysis of them, you could get thin analysis as opposed to thicker analysis in which you look at every case in its complexity, and then you may not have such a clear-cut stories of capital being against the folks, the fisher folks in this case. I don't know. I'm thinking, for instance, the case that I do know a little bit, which is the one you mentioned about Balearic Islands. I note that the version by the big guys, let's say, is that it was never an industrial project, it was a scientific one, and that Greenpeace insisted that it was scientific, but that it was industrial, that it was related to oil prospection. But what the scientists say is that there is not oil to prospect, and that is clear since at least the 80s, and that the goal was just to learn more about marine geology with minimal damage to the local flora and fauna. That's what the scientists say, and I've talked to some of the scientists involved in the project, and they are really pissed off because they say we are the real environmentalists. These guys invented a conflict, let's say. So in this case, if you did a thick analysis of the conflict, you may come to the conclusion that it was not capital against people, that it was a little more complex. So I'm saying that I understand the value of the methodology, but I'm asking you about its possible potential inherent dangers. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Okay, let me talk a little bit more about the methodology. And the question is a very good one. Thank you for that. Well, I stated the statistical political ecology methodology, which was also discussed a lot by the research group itself. And it is mainly used more in some global analysis. For example, there is one article that came out in 2022, on environmental defenders. And here we use more really in a statistical way, in fact, different correlations between these conflicts. I mean, there it is much more kind of a statistical analysis, but like for my case, I would say I'm just talking for the article that has been published, because these Mediterranean cases are something that I just picked up for your research, so that might be more interesting. So I don't have a deep analysis of those yet. But well, for my research, I would say more that it tries to make a more in-depth analysis. So that's why also, like I was also asked by one of the reviewers, for example, to understand better the class dynamics of fisher people, which was a valid concern, especially for a journal like the Journal of Peasant Studies. And there, I mean, there are few studies, and you really need to focus on different cases and different geographies and different socio-political and ecological contexts indeed. And well, but still, both by talking to the literature and to these insights that we gathered in these moments, we can still make an in-depth analysis. Or there are other cases, for example, which focus on perhaps 3 or 4 cases, but on the gender dynamics, what is going on there. And then it includes like the collaboration of a couple of academics who form part of the research project, or like who have been kind of contacted to the research project, and perhaps other local experts, let's say, or local actors, let's say, who are producing their own knowledge. That's why we name it as a collaborative research project. So when we talk about science, we also have, I get your concern, which is, of course, needs a debate. But like, then when we talk about science, we also need to talk about science by whom, who produces the science, and for whom, in the service of whom, and how is the science made? How is the knowledge produced, right? That's why I find it very important, this co-production of knowledge and collaborative research project parts. And then you decide a little bit. I know that it might have its gaps when you talk about like in a very broad sense, about all of these 3,900 to 921 conflicts at the same time. But from different ecological studies, ecological economic studies, we can already talk about, like, if it want to talk about a common enemy, we should talk about structural injustices and structural inequalities. So it is clear that they are going on from an ecological economics or political ecology perspective. And there, of course, you need to specify if you focus on some part of it. And as you mentioned in this case, yes, we have to understand really very well what these scientists also say, not by kind of putting them into the same category. I understand totally, but it needs, I mean, I find it important to bring together this approach of statistical political ecology together with in-depth analysis, let's say, in order to fill these gaps that you also mentioned.
Thank you. More questions from the online audience or the physical one? Well, all of you are physical, I hope.
He has a question.
Oh, he has
Hello, Irma, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for a great presentation. It's really, really important that your research kind of brings to the fore the more often than not unheard of voices by the small-scale fishermen and their resistance, opposition, and struggles against large-scale industrial projects. My question is, if I may say, also kind of methodological. So I guess that during your survey, your examination of these different case studies, you came across marked differences on a national, regional, local scale, even between coastal fishermen communities or fishermen communities in small isolated islands, for example. So I was wondering whether, I guess you also conducted some kind of like interviews, like semi-structured interviews with fishermen communities. So I was wondering to what extent their kind of like empirical know-how and their like folk knowledge about how to better, more effectively exploit their fish catches kind of was inserted into these discussions as a proof of like we have leverage, we have the legal grounds, we have footing to be really on top of like the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is my question.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me give you a couple of different responses because you touched upon important points.
Yes.
First of all, as you said, small-scale fishers, it's not a homogeneous community. It's not a homogeneous entity either. No, it differs a lot from like Europe, let's say Mediterranean Europe, to part of Turkey. In Turkey, there are also distinctive types, or like to Indonesia or to Africa. It depends on, of course, the marine ecosystem and the species that they can catch. It depends on their technological capacity and it depends on their socioeconomic context. So in Europe, for example, small-scale fisheries are usually defined in national legislations as the ones smaller than 12 meters. And with that and that year, which usually excludes, I try to kind of make a definition, which is more or less valid, which usually excludes purse seines and trawls. But in some cases, in some countries, it includes some part of a small purse seines, which can also be kind of, which can also damage the coastal ecosystems. So that's part of the discussion of small-scale fisheries. Then, for example, in Africa, you see very small boats that are just going, that were just going like kind of 2, 3, 5, mostly 10 meters away from the coast. They were catching everything they need for 1 week, perhaps. there were not that many exports, but they were consuming a lot of fish. That was more kind of a subsistence based. I mean, the European ones are doing kind of commercial fishing, but with a much smaller scale. And the others were mainly based on subsistence and for their livelihood. But what happened, like with the intervention of industrial fisheries and with the overfishing and these bilateral agreements between countries and so on and so forth, with the entire industrialization of the sector, all of them slowly begin to suffer from the impacts of it. Both impacts from both like ecological impacts on marine ecosystems and social and economic impacts as well. In Turkey, for example, when we talk about small-scale fishers, and in Europe as well in many cases, they suffer a lot from intermediaries. In Turkey, it is even more compared to Spain, for example. They suffer a lot from intermediaries because they don't gain anything. They don't gain sufficient income from their economic activity. And then we are talking about Istanbul region, there is a huge marine social metabolism increase, of course, like with lots of urbanization, with lots of industrial projects that have been going on for decades. And at the end of the day, like a sea, Marmara Sea, which is in fact very rich in terms of biodiversity, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and there are like 2-3 commercial species and not anymore. Okay, then regarding the discussion of small-scale fisheries, both in this article I have kind of one section discussing their class structure, and then we have Basurto and a colleague's article, Xavier Basurto and another person, I don't remember the name, a very well discussion of how the small-scale fisheries are discussed, under which circumstances, which is the best article reference that I can talk. Then regarding the question, regarding the final part of your question, to what extent they have this local knowledge, folk knowledge regarding the fish catch, and to what extent they position themselves and how they become part of the struggle, right? In different, perhaps isolated cases. Here, what I experienced as a scholar activist, let's say, well, this is also a knowledge creation process and kind of like political, becoming a political social actor, process of becoming a social actor. Like the one Istanbul Birlik in Istanbul, they once began to collaborate with universities, with civil society, with some kind of actors linked to slow food networks. And they began to problematize the issue of industrial fisheries because they were just catching smaller size fish. One of the bluefish, one of the very famous bluefish called lüfer in Istanbul, that is kind of very specific to the Bosphorus. There's a specific period of lüfer which is very famous for Istanbul and so on. So that was each time getting less and less, and at the same time they were not being able to catch. So they initiated this campaign, but they were in fact they were talking about the sustainability issue more and more because they were facing it, and they were kind of positioning themselves as a social actor defending the sustainability of the marine resources. So they were saying, okay, fish is not a commodity. I mean, once Erdogan cartel told us, fish is not a commodity, it is food. So having a different perspective on the fish they catch with the seas and oceans. But at the same time, I would say that he was unaware about the general conceptual or like broad problems of fisheries and what is happening around the world. So it was a little bit like thanks to this relation with different social actors that he could come to Spain, for example, to Vitoria, to one of the meetings of where La Via Campesina was also present, where academic actors were present. And he was also one of the participants in the ocean grabbing panel, for example. Or after that, like coming to WFFB general meeting with the invitation of some civil society members, he became more aware, and he also translated this knowledge and this what was going on in different places and different organizations to his group. And then they were becoming more kind of a politically active social actor, or both in national legislations, positioning themselves in national legislations and trying to get more mobilized, with lots of challenges, of course, I have to admit. But well, they were listening more, they were seeing experiences of each other, the visits that they could do thanks to these organizations, it was really mind-opening for them. And well, they also listened, for example, to the ITQ issues, individual tradable quotas issues, and the struggle against it in South Africa. They could listen to other struggles in India, and so on and so forth. I think ecologically, they face it. They really face it. I mean, if they are, usually they are more or less kind of people older than 50 years, you know, most of the fishers in the Mediterranean, let's say. And they have lived different decades of this marine ecosystem. So ecologically, they already have a knowledge about it and how it has been changing. But then politically, how to position themselves depends on to what extent they are kind of collaborating with different social actors or with different fisher organizations, I might say.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes? Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you so much for this article. It was really interesting. And I actually have too many questions, so I'll try to prioritize. I'll relate this to what I think Lina was asking earlier. I'm curious to understand more about your sort of classification between material and biophysical dimension and spatial justice. Why or what line are you following in that demarcation? Because I think you say at one point in the article that political decisions result in how investment projects are placed and which groups become displaced or dispossessed. And I'm wondering, do you think that they also, political decisions also result in the material science and technology behind ocean grabbing, and vice versa? Does the science and technology behind ocean grabbing influence political decisions afterwards? Because in a way, I'm trying to understand how this analysis is specifically useful for marine ecologies as opposed to other types of ecologies. And that, well, again, I have more questions, but if you can also speak a little to us to in what way is the Blue Justice Framework, again, in what way does it specify or does it show us, emphasizes conflict that are related to marine ecologies as opposed to other types of ecologies? Again, the material and biophysical dimension, the spatial justice dimension, and the autonomy and sovereignty dimension, could those not also be applied to other type of ecological sort of issues, phenomena, conflicts? And so why does this help us understand the marine dimension better? I don't know if that was a bit confusing.
Let me try to answer it. If I can't touch upon the specific point, then we can make another try. So let's first talk about the Blue Justice theoretical framework and how and why I defined under these three categories. First of all, I had these fisher organizations at my mind, and I had the objective of, since I have been kind of experiencing their struggles, and since I have been also experiencing, even within the same research group focusing on environmental justice, or like other people who are very activists in the circles of food sovereignty, they were unaware of these social movements. And when I first heard these social movements, I was also like impressed and surprised, positively surprised. Well, that's why one of the objectives were analyzing and showing these socio-ecological conflicts linked to fisheries, where fisher people were really, in fact, the main mobilized social actors. So that's a little bit, I mean, of course, I said there are different conceptualizations of environmental justice. Some of them are focusing on spatial justice per se, for example, or others like Schlossberg, some of you would know for sure. They are focusing on participation, recognition, distribution, and capabilities aspects. These 4 aspects. And most of the studies conducted in marine area, when they talk about environmental justice, which was also very rare in a way. Like people doing fisheries issues, they were not talking about environmental justice. And people talking about environmental justice, they were not talking about fisher people. So that's where the motivation came from, in a way, to try to merge this. And there were recent attempts of, especially TBTI, Too Big to Ignore, that's again another big collective composed of mainly academics, in fact, but also some civil society members. They were trying to refer to blue justice, but there was no, in fact, there is also a book that came up in 2022 with 4 co-editors that was mostly also based on TBTI's work. They were talking about blue justice, but there was no real focus on, in a global way, on different aspects of these fisher struggles. So either they were focusing on some, or they were talking about marine governance and policies, but in fact, they were neglecting the social actors, like the fishers as a social actors, let's say. So that's why I tried to, experiencing this, I tried to first focus on my knowledge from environmental justice theories and debates. And there I wanted to show the first one, why these fisheries conflicts are linked to each other. Because we are experiencing, as a general society, we are experiencing an increased marine social metabolism. That's clear. And I tried to show that. That's clear because, we have lots of more industrial projects placed on the coast. Some, as I said, when I focus on material and biophysical dimension, I tried to show first the peak fish issue, or in overfishing and its effects. And then the second one was not only overfishing and its effects, but also the increased contamination and waste, like treating the seas and oceans as a blank page or big hole where everything would disappear, but in the depths it does not disappear, as you know. And sometimes it also appears in the surface, which was the case 2 years ago in the Marmara Sea. So this material and biophysical dimension affects all of the fisher actors, that's for sure. Both in in different ways, in different moments, that's also correct, but it affects adversely the fisher people and the communities. Then we have spatial justice, because also there was a recent discussion on ocean grabbing, which tried to define ocean grabbing. There are some debates, since 2015, let's say. But again, first, there's the issue of spatial allocation, which is again discussed a lot in the European Union, in the European Commission, or in other regional, by other regional, let's say, actors. But at the same time, there was this blue growth issue, for example, which affects both of the dimensions in a way. But the seas and oceans were treated again in a way where local fisher people, small-scale fisher people, are they do not exist, right? That's from the last century, and they do not exist. And it was in fact one of the comments of a European Commission representative in one of our meetings. He said, "Well, small-scale fishers that should die," he said. So because of the tragedy of the commons, they should die. They can become professors, they can become doctors, he said. He was from Sweden, I think. So that was I also tried to show the problematic vision or the problematic view towards the allocation of these spaces, because they are commons and they were used for generations by small-scale fishers as well. Coming to your last part of your question, when you say these 3 dimensions, can't we use it for other conflicts or for other social actors? I think we can, but they would be perhaps in some cases less helpful. If we talk about, for example, they still might. I don't know. I had one example, but like, for example, palm conflicts. No, maybe they would have other dimensions, or we would need different framings so that we can understand their conflicts. But this framework was very helpful to understand, kind of to analyze these 120 conflicts and fisher organization struggles in a way. I think here I will stop. If you have follow-up questions, just feel free to ask, of course.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for the papers. It is an interesting paper to identify conflicts. So just I would like to have some comments more than questions about, I would like to interact with your research paper. And beginning with the title of the paper, that is, we are the ocean, we are the people, fishers, people are. So there is a historical perspective. I mean, that's seen that fishing and shipping, for example, are always see the ownership, or they feel the ownership of the seas. The seas, I mean, they are the most traditional sectors are laying in the sea for many centuries ago. So then I see that you, in the title, you mentioned fishers people. My first impression about the papers, it was about fisher sector. But when I read your papers, it's about a small part of people, which are the small-scale fisheries or artisanal fishers with other word. So you are focusing on this minority of people in your paper. And you mentioned also the blue justice that my colleague Ada, she was asking about. I'm curious to know exactly what you are meaning by blue justice. Blue, the term blue. As I'm from background, I like the terminology of everything. So, you know, blue, it refers to blue economy, and we have the blue growth, and which not refer only to the environmental dimensions, but only refer to economical dimensions. So do you mean by blue justice is the same environmental justice, or do you mean something else? Also in the paper, I see that the paper have a review, intensive review of conflicts that are happening worldwide, which is interesting for analyzing this conflict. But I think that it misses a part of review of solutions that are already in place worldwide. I can set an example from, I mean, from the European Union, for example. They started with the directive is called the Maritime Special Planning Directive, which is in 2014. And all European countries must have a plan, maritime plans, by 2021. And worldwide, the IOC UNESCO also launched a global initiatives to plan our seas and oceans by 2030. Maritime spatial planning, as you know, is a tool to manage sustainably our seas and oceans. It's about, I mean, the second point about spatial conflicts, it's well solved by this tool. Marine spatial planning is public process to analyzing and allocating activities, I mean, spatial and temporal activities in maritime areas to achieve ecological, which is environmental, your first objective, social and economic objectives, and this through a political process. So I think this important tool, it was for now, it's coming to 2 decades in the space, in the countries, on the seas, and we are working on these issues. I'm one of the marine special planners. I'm one of the Mediterranean Sea community of practice of this tool. And I think it's one of the most important tools that can solve this environmental justice. Because one of the pillars of marine spatial planning is a participatory approach, which is about stakeholder involvement, which is involving fisheries sectors, small-scale fisheries with industrial too, making some trade-off if we need it. I mean, it's complex process to finally get three-dimensional objectives. One of them is environmental, but also economical. You are talking about the blue growth, which is a strategy from the European Union launched in 2012. And it's about 5 priority sectors. I mean, aquaculture, mining, and bioprospecting, renewables, and but not only that, but this is the sectors that have potential for driving their economy. Fishing and shipping and other old sectors are considered in this, but with no potential for expansion. I mean, the future only for these small sectors that are emerging in the last years. So the global growth, or the blue growth, is about making equation or balance between resolving conflict between the sectors in the sea and resolving the conflicts between sectors and the environmental areas. So I think this tool can achieve your goals in this paper. So that's all. This is my interaction with your paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments. But I missed the name, by the way.
Ayman.
Sorry, say it again.
Ayman.
Ayman. Okay. Well, shall I begin from the end? No. Let me check it. Okay. Let's begin with the same chronology and end up at the final question or comment, since it is a longer one, perhaps. Well, let's talking about the title of the article. Yes, I consciously chose that word because first, as I said, that was the slogan of the 7th General Assembly of WFFP, where I also participated and made most of the in-depth interviews. And then they don't call themselves small-scale fishers. They call themselves, we are the people, we are the fisher people, referring to the peoples and their rights. So that's another, that's not an economic approach, that's not a sectorial approach, that's a debate on rights, mostly, fishers' rights to the sea. So as you said, like they are representing just a small part of the fisher sector. That's not true. That's absolutely not true, because they can represent, in terms of capital, they can represent a smaller part. But in terms of people employed in the sector, in the fisheries sector, there is a report by FAO, 2015. If I'm not mistaken, the numbers are like around 2/3 of the people employed in the fisheries sector. If it's not 80%, I'm not very sure. It should be checked again. But in terms of employment, they are more people, much more people than employed in the fisheries, industrial fisheries sector. Okay, then why blue? Okay, good question. Why blue? First, as I said when I was responding to Ada's question, it was an attempt to bring together the people who were the people and the debates and the activism who was focusing on environmental justice, and the people, as you do, working on fisheries governance or blue sectors, right? Why blue? Because it is related to marine issues and fisher people, but at the same time, it comes from a motivation to merge these two debates, but try to bring a more critical perspective, a systematic critical perspective, which benefits from environmental justice debates and also from like rural studies, peasant studies, and so on and so forth. So I know pretty well, I would say, blue economy and blue growth debates, and there we will disagree with you. We will disagree with you, I mean, with your comment. Thank you very much for that. It misses some solutions or review of solutions. That's fine. What I try to say in the article is, I guess, like I try to highlight these three dimensions and blue justice perspective, so that it can be much more involved in both like global discussions both by political actors, but also from social movements, like seeing, empowering fisher people as part of social actors, small-scale fisher people, and like opening up the space in all of these politics, let's say blue politics, which is not only economy, as you said, okay, they have economy, social, and economic perspective, but I will disagree with you that they provide solutions. I have been involved in many European debates or like more global debates, political debates, and I have seen, for example, I will give you some examples as well. I have been in aquaculture, a part of Aquaculture Advisory Council, representing an NGO. So what they were understanding from participation was that we were there, participating or present in the room, where there were decisions that will be taken anyways. We can say as we want, we can maybe shape a little bit towards a more sustainable things, where the main discussion was saying like, let's not name it sustainable, let's name it responsible, because we won't be sustainable anyways, okay? So the solution where we will be disagreeing with you is like, we need a systemic change, which should go towards the paths of food sovereignty, blue degrowth, as we mentioned and try to like, Maria Michael coined it, but in 2020 we published a special issue about it. So not blue growth, even though it names these political, economic, and social aspects, because they are not leading us to I mean, all of the degrowth debates and blue degrowth debates which were missing. We try to politicize the issue in a more systemic way, where we also have to think about structural inequalities, capitalism, and the critique of capitalism, and not and the growth imperative of capitalist economies. So all of these systematic issues need to be present in this debate, and they are not, unfortunately, they are not there in neither in Marine Special Planning Directive, nor in like different COPs focusing on it, and even focusing on climate change or on maritime perspectives, because blue growth. Let's focus on Europe. Blue Growth Green Paper published in 2012. It was basically focusing on economic dimensions with some sustainability perspective, but it was mainly aiming at like, okay, Europe needs to use more marine spaces in order to have more industrial growth. So that ignores totally these small-scale fisher actors, and that ignores totally marine ecosystems. And there are lots of criticism about, like, let's say, blue finance methods, Agenda 30 by 30, even though it sounded perfect, very nice, okay, finally we will protect the seas, no? But there are lots of critiques recently written. You can see some TNI reports, or like Understanding made a very nice critique about these attempts, or you can see some on marine special planning issues, again, published in the Journal of Peasant Studies, I guess, or TNI reports. So all of them have different problematics politically. So I don't see them as solutions.
Thank you very much. My name is Alberto. Congratulations for your work. It's very, very, very interesting, and I think it's very useful for our project. My question is a short question. It's only about the methodology. What is the chronology? Is there a timeline or similar to this? Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. For the work that I had done which was published in the Journal of Peasant Studies, that were most of them were either ongoing conflicts, some of them were being stopped, there were not kind of very old conflicts, let's say. And well, in the methodology some conflict is stopped, or some industrial project is stopped, there is the tendency of approaching to that conflict as a latent conflict. Because in many times, some industrial projects, they are being stopped because of the environmental impact assessment, for example, but then they come back. And in some of these examples that some of the not very well analyzed examples, but they are there to be analyzed in focusing on the Mediterranean. There are also different timelines, or like there are also different projects that come back. No, so what I tried there was like mainly focusing on the ongoing projects or ongoing struggles, but we have an important gap, in fact, which is the actualization of the data. This is one of the main methodological gaps, perhaps, because like sometimes we have some cases that are like continuously being actualized, but others are like that's the data entered there in 2018. Then we don't have information about its current situation. No, like the ones I showed you about Mediterranean has the same problem, for example, because I haven't analyzed them yet. But then, there is the necessity of like trying to get more in contact with people and so in order to understand which ones are still valid or how they are proceeding, whether one case has stopped or not. But methodologically, that's a more kind of a difficult gap. Especially when we think globally, no? If you make a study about focusing on 5 cases, then you can contact directly the people who are organized there on the ground, because you can see also their contacts or their names, or you can also make your further study, make in-depth interviews and like try to bring this in-depth analysis. Otherwise, it is a little bit more limited.
Okay. Effie, I think your work you have to go. I keep hearing something there. Effie, your virtual hand is lifted from before, right? Oh, okay, you don't have a new question. Okay.
Yes, it's from before. I will take a second.
Hi, Irma. I'm Maria Villarín. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a brief question. Maybe I'm going to find the answer in your article deeply, but I would like to know which parameters or something like this have you selected to define a conflict? For example, have you selected by articles, surveys, or how do you define this is a conflict or not? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Well, again, methodology or following the parameters. There is this database form in the Environmental Justice Atlas, which has different questions to the not to the participants, let's say to the collaborators who want to identify a conflict. And then there are some questions which are obligatory in order to that case to be filled, and some that are like kind of optional, but it would give further data, right? This aims like to have a wider coverage, but at the same time, at least having the minimum of the minimum amount of information. So since I chose all of the conflict, either I entered some of the conflicts, and there is a moderation within the project of these conflicts. So if somebody is entering a fake conflict, for example, it would be filtered through the modernization process within the project. And the parameters are different in each step that I mentioned in the methodological part. The data form asks like the location of the conflict, the type of the conflict, and then the actors, like the actors who are trying to realize this industrial project and what kind of an industrial project it is, and then the actors that are opposing it. What kind of impacts, like actual impacts or potential impacts this industrial project has, or what kind of mobilizations have been visible, have been used by the resistance or by the struggle, by the opponent part of the conflict, let's say. or again, what is the commodity there at stake, or like the project details, like there will be one thermal power plant producing that amount of electricity, blah, 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 blah. It is financed by the national governance of blah, 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 or like this BP is trying to explore this natural gas, etc., etc. So all of these parameters, they need to be filled. Some of them are, as I said, some of them are obligatory, others are not. You can check it easily, by the way, if you enter to www.ejatlas.com. And then accordingly, if there is kind of a mobilization, in a way, I mean, just to give a brief definition, if there is a mobilization with different actors with claims of environmental justice, which can focus on different impacts, contesting different impacts of these projects, of course, then it is considered as a conflict. Further definition you can find also in Environmental Defenders article, which was published in the Global Environmental Change. Thank you.
All right. Are there any more questions in the room or online? If many. Okay, Ada, you are allowed to ask one more, but Pablo has more questions. We won't be long because it's already been an hour and a half.
Okay. Hello. So my name is Pablo. Thank you very much for your talk. So I just wanted to thank you for your conference. I mean, it's not a question, it's that it was really illuminating to me to find that the quantitative and qualitative approaches in political ecology can be merged together, because my previous reads on this topic were almost, qualitative, coming from a historical materialist position and so on. So I normally find that whenever politics turn out to be quantitative, there many times those analyses are carried out for government purposes or for business purposes. But those as first from the qualitative and quantitative worlds are not merged together. So I love that. And I think that's the only way to trigger global action, because in this world, like nowadays, if we want to change things globally, we can't just abolish globalization. We have to rethink it. So, I mean, I think that's kind of your approach, and I found it really interesting. And I think also that's the only way to connect like academic research with, the fights of all voices and, the subaltern people and so on. So, I mean, it was just really illuminating for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Please, could you ask the last question?
No, really, I don't. This is. I don't want to.
Final one.
Which one should I ask? Well, I mean, okay. I'm gonna make this a more pragmatic thing about actually the project that you worked on, because that could actually be useful for us. Looking at your map, which is, I think, also related to my last question. If you look at the map that you put in the PowerPoint, but I went on the site as well. The map, because the project again is focused primarily in general on environmental justice cases, right? It's not just marine environment, but it's general. But still, if you look at the map, it looks like the vast majority of cases are coastal marine cases. And so, again, this opens up, I think, a number of questions. First of all, why? How did you go about selecting that? How did gather that data? What was the data? Was it deliberate in the sense that you went to specific? I mean, you, the group, the team, went to specific places or looked at specific places, or were you receiving data from in other ways? And so again, sort of connecting this to what I was asking before, is it from an analytical point of view, from a theoretical point of view, more than from the sort of visibility that this gives to the problem, because I really appreciate the sort of trying to bring a focus of marine conflicts to this broader environmental justice issue. But is it then useful, while you're bringing them together, to then make sort of a binary between how to analyze the two different types? Which is why I'm asking, what is the blue justice framework? Why is it specific to marine cases of environmental justice, and we couldn't use it for other cases of environmental injustice? Is it useful to make that binary, and if it is, why? Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. I love the questions, and you can drop me an email if you have lots of them. No worries. Let's focus. Focusing on the map. You're right. Most of them are placed on the coasts. This has different reasons, of course, because I mean, as I said, like marine environments are usually treated as a big whole, as a sink with its sink functions, and it gets visible. That's perfect. Like for shipbreaking industry as well. There are different ways of doing it. For example, in Europe, they can do it also on the land, but like in India, in Bangladesh, and in Turkey, in Aliya, near to Izmir especially, they do it either on the coast or like kind of, there are three ways of doing it, but like doing it on the coast allows you to do ecological cost shifting, no? Because like it disappears on the marine area, it disappears in the depths of the Mediterranean or other seas and oceans, and it's very useful. Or for cooling purposes, in many cases of energy power plants, let's say, for cooling purposes, the marine water is being used. And nobody talks about it, in fact. I mean, it's not being considered. But then, I mean, even though they are placed there, in most of these cases, the fisher people are not mobilized actors. In many cases, because they are already displaced, for example, or in many cases, small-scale fisher people do not have the capacity to mobilize. In some cases they do, and they can, for example, in Don Diego, Mexico, they stopped a deep sea mining project. But like in many cases, they don't have that kind of a capacity. They are already impoverished, they are already marginalized, they are already subaltern people, if I may say so. So only in these 120 cases, I could identify fisher people as either the main either the main social actors or like one of the main social actors, let's say, even though there are lots of industrial projects placed on the coasts. I hope that's more or less clear. So it's not the majority, in fact, it is a minority. And is it clear, Ada? Okay, maybe you can jump in.
Sorry, I hope this is not, I'm referring to the map from not the one in your article, but the one that you put
global
in.
Map.
So with
Exactly.
every sort of conflict that is not just, okay, sorry, okay, I was just wanted to
Most of these conflicts placed in the global map, they are placed on the coast, that's true. But only in 120 that I could analyze, the fisher people were the main social actors or one of the main social actors that were being mobilized. And the reasons for it because they already disappeared, because they are already displaced, because they are already marginalized. Either they do not exist, literally, because each time, for example, in Europe, we have less small-scale fisher people, or, I mean, Senegalese fisher people came to Spain in order to work in different ways, right? Okay, that's part of the answer. And how did I gather the data? I or my colleagues? Then we have also two parts. For my work and analysis, I'm doing these in-depth interviews and collaborating with some of these fisher organizations on the ground, making some also online meetings and so on and so forth. Part of this data was gathered by myself, according to the methodology, according to the form in this EJ Atlas. Others were already there, some of them were already there by some of the environmental justice organizations or perhaps some academics, researchers. So in my case, it was through this different ways of collaboration. And since I wanted to make this, make the case of small-scale fisher people more visible, I deliberately chose the ones and I entered the data, part of the data, and then I made an analysis of these 120 cases. In other cases, how do we get this, how do we get the information regarding these conflicts? There are several networks based on years of collaboration, individual activism in different groups, or like collaboration with different networks and so on and so forth. Some of them already know very well the project, and they, in order to make their political cause, they find it really useful as well. In Latin America, for example, there are several groups that are like Claxo as well. Again, activists or researchers, academics, a combination of all of these. They already, in this collaborative research process, they already enter the data there because they may try to make visible also these cases. Then they can just take, for example, you can filter let's say palm oil conflicts in Latin America or in one country specifically, or you can focus on water management conflicts in India, etc., which also makes powerful sometimes the efforts of the environmental justice organizations on the ground. So from a more analytical point of view, this binary, I'm not seeing it as a binary when I talk about blue justice. I could also name it like marine environmental justice perhaps, but there was recently these debates on blue economy, blue growth. So we were trying to contest the blue growth ideals and imperative, let's say, with blue degrowth and so on and so forth. So there were some blue discussions. That's why I named it as blue justice. And there were some attempts of also fisheries, defining fisheries justice and blue justice. I tried to name it like this, but I find it's kind of part of the environmental justice discussions. As I said, like in this Ageman and the others article, like the environment is defined as like where we live, where we work, where we play, and where we eat. And it refers to the alliances of these different justice claims and of these different justice movements. That's why I don't see it kind of a binary in a way. I see it kind of part of these alliances with a specific focus on fisher people on the ground and fisher people as a social actor, let's say. Otherwise, I think all of these three dimensions can be. I mean, you should think also. I mean, you should choose them according to your data from the ground, like which theoretical framework to apply. If it fits to your case, let's say, it can be like palm oil conflicts, or it can be water management conflicts, or it can be kind of gender in environmental conflicts, etc. If it fits, I think it can be used, of course, in different thematics as well.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for this fascinating talk, Irmak, and for sharing your very, very interesting research. I think the talk session, the Q&A session was also very engaging. We even had the techno-optimist and techno-pessimist positions, so it was very, very interesting. Thanks a lot for that, and we'll see us on November the 15th for the next deep seminar meeting. Thanks, Irmak.
Thanks a lot.